equity awards are a flexible form of discretionary pay. That makes them a great tool for rewarding top performers. But if equity decisions aren't made fairly, those decisions can undermine your efforts to motivate your workforce. In this video, I'm going to talk about 2 ways that your equity program might not be entirely fair, and we'll talk about some potential solutions. Like I said, equity compensation is a form of discretionary pay. That means that your equity awards don't have to be equal. You can grant awards to some employees and not others. And you can give some employees larger grants and other employees smaller grants. That's why equity is a great tool for rewarding top performers. But when you are making decisions about your equity program, you want your equity program to reward the types of behavior that you want to see in your employees. You want your equity program to reward your employees who are working hard, who are successful, who are great performers, and who are really contributing to the overall growth of the company. Which means equity decisions need to be made based on merit. But oftentimes, what we see is that those decisions can be influenced by personal biases or favoritism. A lot of times they get influenced just by the negotiating skills of the individual who's asking for equity. And sometimes we even see that just sheer luck is a factor. And none of these factors help you further the objective of your equity program. So the first area that I really want to talk about is manager discretion over equity grants. It is actually really quite common for managers to have discretion over which of their direct reports receive equity awards and even how large those equity awards are. And oftentimes, this discretion is completely appropriate. Managers are often in the best position to know which of their direct reports should be receiving equity awards. So oftentimes, this manager discretion is actually very helpful. But managers are human, and sometimes when humans make decisions, those decisions are faulty. Sometimes they can be influenced by our own personal biases. Oftentimes that influence is unconscious. We're not even aware that we're doing it. So it is important that you have some controls around how managers can use discretion over equity awards. The first control, obviously, is to just set some guardrails around how much discretion managers have. Another great control, which is often overlooked, is education. Making sure that managers understand what factors they should be considering when they are making decisions about equity grants. That might be a training program, or in some cases, it might make sense for managers to get one-on-one support from the comp department as they make decisions about the equity awards for their direct reports. Another important control is an approval process. Just as managers are requesting grants or making decisions, those decisions are reviewed by someone else, just to have another set of eyes to make sure that they're fair. And of course, anytime you set some guardrails or some guidelines, someone is bound to ask for an exception. Maybe a manager has an employee that they think is really great and they're worried that employee is going to leave. So they want to issue an equity grant that is larger than what would normally be granted at that level. Sometimes managers are right. Sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen, but not always. So it is important to have an exception process. You want managers to have to make a business case for those requests, and you want a way of reviewing those business requests that is both consistent and fair. And then you also want to have an overall review of manager decisions. So not just on a grant by grant basis or a request basis, not just even on an annual basis. You really want a multi-year review process so that you can spot patterns that might be indicative of areas that need to be addressed. The second area I want to talk about is how you size your equity grants. Because the way that most publicly held companies determine equity grant sizes is they have a target value that they want to award to employees. And then when they're actually issuing the awards, they'll divide that target value by the stock price to determine how many shares employees get. And this can result in discrepancies in grant sizes, even though everybody's getting the same value. If one employee is granted an equity award when the stock price is low, that employee's grant might be fairly large, and that employee might be pretty happy about that. But then if another employee gets a grant when the stock price is high, that employee's grant might be actually smaller, and that employee might not be so happy about that. If these discrepancies are happening over a long period of growth for the company, they might be okay. But if those two grants that I just talked about, if those two grants are happening within just a couple of days or a couple of weeks, that employee who got the smaller grant might feel like their grant isn't fair. So one way to mitigate this result is to switch from using a spot price to determine grant sizes to a multi-day average. You can see in my stock price chart here that even just using a 30-day average can really smooth out some of that volatility. And we've actually seen a pretty significant shift in practices here with companies moving towards using a multi-day average from just 27% of companies in 2019 all the way up to 42% of companies in 2022. So I think that just shows that this is a practice worth considering. These are just two ways that your equity program can be inadvertently unfair. We have a great course called Equitable Equity. It's part of our Equity and Compliance Equity Compensation series. And this course looks at a whole host of ways that you want to make sure your equity program is fair. So it talks about these two topics that I just talked about in more detail, but it also covers some additional topics like leaves of absence and sizing global equity grants and doing a pay equity analysis. There's a whole bunch of great topics in this session that will really help you evaluate your equity program and make sure that it's fair. I hope that you will check it out. We'll include a link in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed my video today. If you did, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you're notified when we post new videos, and it really helps us out too. Win-win. Thanks for watching.